In the summer of 1942, Adolf Hitler, emboldened by the initial successes of the German army, launched a daring offensive towards the Soviet Union, eyeing the oil-rich Caucasus and the city of Stalingrad. Stalingrad, a city bearing the name of Stalin himself. Hitler's directive, "We only have to kick in the door and the whole rotten structure will come crashing down," would soon face its ultimate test. This statement would herald the beginning of one of World War II's most infamous battles. This is the story of Stalingrad, not just a battle of armies, but a clash of ideologies, a test of wills, and a turning point in the global conflict, marking the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany's eastern ambitions. The battle raged for 5 months, 1 week and 3 days from August 23, 1942 to February 2, 1943, making it one of the longest and bloodiest engagements in warfare. As the German Sixth Army, under the command of General Friedrich Paulus, approached Stalingrad with a sense of inevitability. The initial bombardments had turned the city into a landscape of rubble, setting the stage for what many believed would be a swift conquest. However, the ruins of Stalingrad provided the Soviet defenders with a formidable urban fortress, a maze of shattered buildings and factories that would become the backdrop for a desperate struggle for survival. Its skies blighted by the ominous presence of Luftwaffe bombers. The Soviet 62nd Army, under the determined leadership of General Vasily Chuikov, along with Red Army soldiers and hastily assembled militias, stood as the city's last line of defense. Chuikov, understanding the grim reality facing his outnumbered and outgunned forces, adopted a strategy of hugging the enemy, forcing the Germans into close-quarters combat and negating their artillery and air superiority. "We will defend the city or die in the attempt," Chuikov declared, embodying the resolve of the Soviet defenders. The battle quickly degenerated into brutal house-to-house fighting. Every street, every building, every floor became a battleground. Soviet soldiers, civilians, and even children took up arms, constructing defensive lines amidst the chaos. By September 12th, the German army had penetrated the city, initiating brutal house-to-house fighting. As autumn turned to winter, the siege of Stalingrad dragged on, with neither side willing to relent. The Germans made several attempts to capture key locations, such as the tractor factory and the Mamayev-Kurgan Hill, only to be met with fierce resistance. Supplies for the besieged Sixth Army began to dwindle, as the Soviet Red Army, reinforced and resupplied across the Volga, continued to hold the city with a tenacity that surprised and demoralized the German invaders. Stalin's order, "not one step back," encapsulated the desperate yet determined Soviet stance. The Soviet defenders, facing the existential threat of annihilation, fought with a desperation and courage that turned Stalingrad into a symbol of Soviet resilience and defiance. In the ruins of Stalingrad, amidst relentless warfare, emerged tales of extraordinary heroism. Snipers like Vasily Zaitsev became legends, embodying the spirit of Soviet resistance. The battle raged not just for control of territories, but for the very essence of human endurance and sacrifice. As winter descended upon Stalingrad, the tide of battle began to shift. The Soviet command, under the strategic guidance of Generals Georgy Zhukov and Alexander Vasilevsky, launched Operation Uranus. Operation Uranus was aimed at the weakly defended flanks of the Sixth Army, held not by elite German troops but by Romanian, Hungarian, and Italian divisions, ill-equipped to withstand a major Soviet assault. On November 19, 1942, the Soviet counteroffensive began with a massive artillery barrage, followed by a two-pronged attack targeting the Romanian divisions north and south of Stalingrad. The Axis allies were quickly overrun, creating a gap through which Soviet armored and infantry units poured, encircling the German Sixth Army. The speed and ferocity of the Soviet attack caught the Germans off guard, trapping over 250,000 men in a tightening noose. General Paulus, faced with the encirclement, requested permission to withdraw or attempt a breakout towards the German lines. Hitler, however, insisted that Stalingrad be held at all costs, promising an airlift that would supply the encircled troops. This airlift, however, proved woefully inadequate, unable to meet the Sixth Army's needs for ammunition, food, and medical supplies. As the encirclement tightened, temperatures plummeted, and the besieged German forces began to suffer from starvation, frostbite, and disease. The myth of German invincibility, carefully cultivated by Nazi propaganda, began to crumble. Meanwhile, the civilians of Stalingrad endured unimaginable hardships, their lives shattered by the relentless conflict. On January 31, 1943, after months of brutal combat and unbearable conditions, General Paulus made the unprecedented decision to surrender, disobeying Hitler's direct order to fight to the last man. Soviet casualties are estimated at over 1 million, with hundreds of thousands killed and even more wounded, showcasing the immense sacrifice made by the Red Army and the Soviet people. German losses, including Axis allies, amounted to around 800,000 men, with over 90,000 soldiers taken prisoner in the final surrender, many of whom never returned home. If you found this story of resilience, strategy, and human endurance compelling, consider subscribing and joining our community for more insightful narratives from history.